The SEALs pushed through the wall of smoke, their boots hammering against the shattered earth, their lungs burning with every breath. Visibility was gone, the haze thick enough to choke a man, yet their training guided them forward. Every movement, disciplined, every shot fired measured. The commander led them with a hand signal weaving through craters and wreckage, knowing that hesitation would kill them faster than any bullet. The gunfire around them echoed like thunder, each sound a reminder of how thin the line between survival and death had become. Behind them, the medic dragged the wounded with relentless resolve, his arms screaming under the weight, his breath ragged but his grip unbroken, the injured man barely conscious, eyes fluttering. As blood seeped through fresh bandages, the medic whispered promises that they would not be left behind, words meant as much for himself as for the soldier he carried. Each step was agony, each yard a battle, but he pressed on because he knew leaving. A man behind was not an option. Not here. Not ever, even as more shadows closed in around them. The smoke parted briefly, and through the shifting haze, they saw enemy fighters regrouping, their silhouettes sharp against the glow of fire. The commander dropped to one knee, his rifle barking 3 quick shots, dropping 2 hostiles before the others scattered back into cover. The squad moved to support the youngest operator's hands, shook as he reloaded, but he steadied himself, following the rhythm. Of his comrades, he had seen men fall that night, but he was still breathing, still fighting, and that knowledge fueled him, though fear still clawed at his chest. Above them the roar came again, the A-10 diving low, its engines screaming like fury itself, its cannons ripping open the ground. The squad pressed flat as the earth shook, debris raining down like steel hail. The strike forced the enemy back, scattering them once more, but it also deepened the mystery. The pilot was not striking at random. She was striking with impossible precision, every blast timed to the second, every angle chosen to shield them rather than harm them. It was as if she could see through the smoke, as if she were one of them on the ground. The commander keyed the radio, his voice sharp, urgent. "Identify yourself," he demanded. "Who are you?" The silence stretched long enough to feel like betrayal. Then her voice returned steady as before. "You are not cleared to know who I am. Stay alive and follow my fire." She cut the transmission, leaving the squad staring at one another, their faces etched with disbelief and suspicion. The commander clenched the radio harder, anger rising in him, not at her presence but at her secrecy. The fact that she moved above them like a ghost, guiding their survival with no explanation. The veteran growled under his breath. Nobody flies like that. Nobody just shows up in the middle of nowhere without orders. He knew there was something buried beneath the voice, something tied to shadows and secrets. The younger operator tried to ask who she might be, but his words died as more fire cracked through the haze, forcing them back into action. They had no space for questions. Not now. Survival demanded focus, but the mystery gnawed at each man like hunger. Through the smoke, they found what looked like a corridor of broken stone, a path carved by explosions leading toward the far ridge. The commander realized it had been marked for them. Every crater, every broken wall, a guide to lead them through. The chaos, the A-10 had not just been striking enemies, it had been shaping the battlefield into an escape route. The realization chilled him more than it comforted him, because it meant whoever was flying had known their situation from the beginning. As if she had been watching long before the first round was fired, the squad pressed on following the path as more fire erupted behind them. Enemies shouting as they surged through the haze, the SEALs turned to fire in bursts, covering one another, their rounds dwindling with every second. Yet their pace never slowed, every man fueled by a force greater than fear. The commander raised his eyes once more, catching the shadow of wings passing above. And he knew the truth was close. The mystery of the pilot was about to collide with them, but whether it meant salvation or something darker, he could not yet see. The squad pushed toward the ridge, their boots slipping over loose stone. The smoke thinning as the wind shifted, the commander raised his hand signaling silence as the echoes of pursuit still carried behind them. The enemy was not broken. Only slowed by the devastation above, they were still coming relentless as ever. The wounded stumbled, but the medic hauled him forward, teeth clenched, refusing to give. In the ridge was closer now, the faint glow of an open valley beyond. But reaching it would demand every last ounce of strength they had left. Above them the engines roared again, the A-10 sweeping low in a final pass, its cannons tearing the ground behind them, shredding the enemy lines in an eruption of earth and fire. The squad dropped flat as the strike shook the world, their ears ringing, their hearts pounding. It was cover, but it was also farewell. The commander could feel it in his bones. She was burning the last of her fuel, the last of her ammunition, the final gift to buy them time. He knew when the engines faded, they would be alone. The squad crawled through the last stretch of rubble, the smoke lifting. Enough to reveal the valley below, and there waiting at the edge was the impossible salvation. A helicopter, its rotors thundering, its lights cutting through the haze. The commander blinked in disbelief. How could it be here? How could it know their position? The radio crackled again, her voice firm and steady-head. "For the bird extraction window is short. Move now." The squad froze for a second, torn between awe and suspicion, before the commander snapped them forward. They staggered down the slope, bullets snapping overhead as the enemy regrouped faster than expected. Shadows closing in from the ridge above, rifles flashing through the darkness. The squad fired back, what little ammo they had left. Bursts of fire, desperate yet disciplined. The medic dragged the wounded, the youngest operator covering his side, the veteran limping but still firing. They were running on instinct, survival guiding each step, but the valley stretched too far, the helicopter still a painful distance away, and the enemy was closing too fast. Then from the ridge above, a lone figure emerged, silhouetted against the flames. Not an enemy, but someone moving with practiced speed, descending toward the squad, rifle in hand. The commander froze as the figure broke. Into the light, a woman clad in gear not marked by any insignia. Her face streaked with sweat and dust, her eyes hard with focus, and on her shoulder the faint tattoo of wings and talons, the mark known only to a handful of men who had seen her once. Long ago, she was no stranger. She was the ghost who had walked away from their world years before. The squad stared in shock recognition. Striking like lightning, some had heard whispers of her. The pilot who had been more than a pilot. The soldier who had trained with them before disappearing into shadows. None had expected to see her again. Not here, not in the sky above them. Yet she moved with certainty, as if she had never left her rifle. Barked, dropping hostiles with precision, her voice sharp as she shouted for them to move toward the bird, her presence as commanding on the ground as it had been in the cockpit. The commander locked eyes with her as she passed, covering their flank, the weight of questions crashing into him. How had she known they were here? Why had she chosen to return now? What had driven her back into the fire when the world had buried her long ago? But there was no time. Her rifle barked again, cutting down another enemy, her face hard and unyielding, her focus entirely on pulling them through the storm. The commander swallowed his questions and pushed forward, knowing answers would come only if they lived to see the sunrise. The squad broke into the open valley, rounds cracking around them, the helicopter hovering lower, its side door open. A crewman waving frantically for them to move faster. The engines of the A-10 faded into silence overhead, the beast finally gone, leaving only the night and the roar of the helicopter. The squad sprinted, hearts hammering. Lungs burning one by one, they dove into the bird, the medic shoving the wounded inside, the youngest operator stumbling before being dragged in by the veteran, the commander turning back to cover the last stretch. As shadows closed in again, the woman fired one final burst before leaping into the bird, her rifle still smoking, her expression unreadable. As the crew pulled her inside, the commander followed, the hatch slamming shut as the helicopter lifted off the valley, falling away beneath them. The enemy fire fading into the distance, the squad collapsed against the walls of the bird, their bodies shaking from exhaustion, their minds spinning from disbelief. The commander looked across at her, ready to speak, ready to demand answers, but she only stared back, her eyes giving nothing away, and the truth of who she was remained locked in silence. The A-10 banked hard across the canyon, its shadow sweeping over the broken battlefield as the SEALs pulled their wounded tighter into cover. The engines roared like a beast in defiance. The gun spun again, unleashing a curtain of fire across the enemy line. Sparks and flames erupted in every direction. The ground shook. The men could feel it in their bones. But as powerful as the display was, the commander knew the truth. He knew air support never lasted forever. The squad regrouped under the temporary shield of destruction tending to the bleeding, dragging the fallen into makeshift shelters. The medic worked frantically, his hands shaking as he pressed bandages against wounds that would not stop leaking life. Every second mattered, and yet his eyes kept darting to the sky like the others, all of them staring each time the A-10 screamed overhead, praying that it would not be the last pass they saw. They had no other chance. The enemy scrambled like rats in fire, but even broken, they were not gone. They regrouped beyond the ridge, their shadows moving against the glow of burning wrecks. They would wait for the A-10 to break off, then rush in again, and the commander knew they would come harder, more desperate than before. He raised his rifle, scanning the horizon, thinking of the voice on the radio, the calm tone, the steady promise he had heard. It had not been headquarters. It had been someone else entirely. Questions grew like storm clouds in the minds of the squad. Who was she? How had she found them? How did she know their position when command had gone silent? There was no record of Reaper Actual, no call sign like that in their books, not in their experience. And yet she had appeared as if pulled from the very smoke that had been their grave. The commander clenched his jaw. The truth clawed at him. But there was no time to chase it. Another strafing run rattled the ground, the sound of shells splitting stone and flesh. The SEALs ducked their heads, eyes wide as the ridge itself seemed to collapse under the fury. Yet the pilot's precision was uncanny, never striking near them, never risking their cover. She flew with the accuracy of someone who knew the terrain like the back of her hand, someone who knew exactly where they were without seeing them. It was not chance. It was not coincidence. And that haunted the commander. The radio cracked again, her voice cutting through as sharp as a blade. Stay low. Hold your ground, push forward only when I mark the smoke. The SEALs exchanged wary glances, each man questioning whether to trust a ghost, a voice that came from nowhere, yet carried authority that demanded obedience. The commander listened, his chest tightening. Every instinct told him to resist, to demand answers, but survival had stripped them of choices. So he nodded, signaling his men to be ready. The youngest operator whispered, "She sounds like she has done this before." The veteran growled, "She sounds like she has done this too many times." His words, heavy with suspicion, but neither dared to ignore her. Both men shifted their rifles, eyes burning into the smoke, as the ground shook again from the fury of her cannons. The battlefield no longer felt like their own. It felt like hers, carved open. By her fire, controlled by her rhythm, she had become the heartbeat of their survival. Then, as sudden as it had begun, the roar vanished, the A-10 climbing higher until its sound grew faint. The silence that followed was brutal. The enemy would hear it. Too, they would know the beast had left the SEALs crouched, lower rifles up, every sense strained to the night. The commander gritted his teeth, every muscle wound tight. They were not out yet. The battle was only waiting. The storm had paused, but its eye was passing, and what came next could tear them apart. The silence after the A-10 broke away was deafening, the air heavy with smoke and the bitter stench of burned steel. The SEALs held their positions, their ears ringing, their eyes cutting through. The haze, every man waiting for the inevitable sound of boots pushing through the dust. The enemy had not been destroyed, only scattered, and they would return. with rage sharpened by humiliation. The commander scanned the horizon, every muscle in his body strung tight like a wire ready to snap. One operator muttered under his breath that maybe she had left. Maybe that was all they would get. One pass of fire to buy them a few more minutes of life. The words hung in the air, unchallenged, because deep inside they all feared the same truth. No one expected rescue. No one expected survival. Not here. Not after the radio silence had confirmed they had been cut off and left behind. The youngest among them clutched his weapon tighter, staring into the smoke, praying to hear the roar of engines again. Then faintly at first came the sound. They dreaded the shuffle of boots, the guttural shouts of the enemy regrouping in the shadows. They were moving quickly, their discipline restored by the quiet. They would strike again, and this time there would be no cover of air support to hold them back. The commander raised his hand, signaling his squad to stay low, their magazines nearly empty, their grenades already spent. What they had left would not last long against the tide that was building beyond the ridge. The medic pressed a bandage into the side of a wounded operator, his face pale from blood loss. The man gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. He wanted to lift his rifle, but his strength was gone. The medic shook his head, his own hands trembling but still steady enough to work. He knew what was coming. He knew they would be overrun, and yet he kept working as if saving one man mattered, as if the fight had not already outgrown them. The commander saw it and felt a knot tighten in his chest. The shadows grew larger. The first enemy figure cresting the ridge with rifle raised, a shot rang out from the SEAL's position, dropping him instantly. But the return fire was immediate. The wall above their heads erupted with stone dust as bullets slammed into their cover. The squad pressed flat, answering with short bursts that chewed through what little ammo remained. The commander shouted orders, his voice drowned beneath the rattle of gunfire, every sound, every vibration, carrying the promise of collapse. In the chaos, the radio crackled again, faint, as if pulled from the smoke itself. The same voice, calm, sharp, steady move on my mark. Smoke inbound, the SEALs froze for a fraction. Of a second, disbelief rippling through them. She had not left. She was still out there, still circling. Still watching. The commander clenched the radio, his heart hammering. He wanted to answer, wanted to demand how she knew where they were, how she saw through the storm. But another barrage of fire forced him down before he could speak. A hiss filled the air, a streak cut across the night, a canister slamming into the earth near the enemy lines. The explosion did not kill it. Blinded smoke poured, thick and fast, swallowing the ridge in a curtain of white. The SEALs stared wide-eyed as the battlefield shifted in an instant. Their commander rose, shouting to push forward through the haze. The chance had come, carved by someone above who knew exactly when and where to strike. The squad moved, their boots pounding the dirt, their rifles raised, their lungs burning as they plunged into the storm. Every step into the smoke was a gamble. Shapes moved, shadows lunged, the squad fired on instinct, cutting down anything that rose too close, their formation tight, their movements drilled into them through years of discipline, but the enemy pressed just as hard. Gunfire flashing inside the fog. The commander led from the front, his rifle barking. Each shot a prayer that the path ahead would not collapse. The medic dragged the wounded behind them, teeth gritted, refusing to leave anyone, even as rounds sparked around his feet. Through the smoke, the A-10 roared again, low and fast, the ground shaking. As its cannons ripped into the flank of the enemy line, the SEALs could not see it, but they felt it. The vibrations rattling their teeth, the screams echoing through the haze. The commander lifted his head for a heartbeat, catching the shadow of wings overhead, and in that moment, he knew this was no accident, no coincidence. Someone had chosen to watch them, someone had chosen to save them, and the reason remained a mystery that could change everything. The SEALs crouched low in the dust, their rifles aimed into the haze that rolled up from burning vehicles, the sound of gunfire echoing in every direction. They had been ambushed, pinned down by forces far larger than expected the radio static offered. No help, no orders. Only silence broken by the screams of mortar shells overhead. They were running out of time, running out of ammunition, and even the most seasoned veterans among them knew the odds had shifted against them, but none dared say it. Aloud, each breath was heavy with the weight of hopelessness. The commander scanned the ridge above their position, sweat dripping into his eyes as he counted the seconds between bursts of fire. The enemy was tightening the noose, pushing closer with each coordinated wave. The squad tried to push back, but every shot seemed to be swallowed by the sheer volume of fire raining down on them. He thought of extraction, but the landing zone was compromised. Their comms jammed, there would be no rescue, unless a miracle dropped from the sky itself, and miracles were not common on battlefields like this. The youngest operator tried to reload, but his trembling hands betrayed his fear. He muttered a curse as another magazine clattered to the ground, and the veteran beside him dragged him down before a burst of gunfire chewed the stone wall above their heads. The reality was stark. Their defensive line was crumbling piece by piece. Men who had fought and won in the harshest conditions now found themselves staring at the edge of defeat with nothing left to give but courage that would not stop the storm closing in on them. As the enemy advanced, their shouts carried across the battlefield, their confidence rising with every yard taken. The SEALs had been reduced to fighting for inches, pressing their bodies into broken walls, hoping to find some shield from the barrage, yet there was none. Smoke hung thick, the acrid burn of fuel and dust clogging their lungs. The commander tried to raise headquarters one last time, his voice strained with the knowledge this might be his final report, but the radio hissed and crackled, mocking him with silence as the sound of boots pounded closer. One operator whispered a prayer not for victory, but for time, a single moment more to see a way out. His words were lost under the thunder of another explosion that threw debris across their cover. The squad shielded their faces, battered from every side. There was nowhere left to retreat. The commander raised his hand, signaling the last stand. His men gripped their weapons, not in hope of survival, but in defiance of the death pressing toward them. Their eyes burned with the fire of soldiers who knew the end could be seconds away. Then above the chaos, a sound broke through, faint at first, but growing with terrifying speed. A low rumble carried on the wind, so different from the whine of mortars or the rattle of rifles. It was deeper, heavier. It shook the dust from the ridge, and for a heartbeat, even the enemy hesitated, their advance faltering as all eyes lifted to the sky. The SEALs froze, their weapons slackening. Their breath caught in their throats as the sound grew into a roar, and the shadow of wings spread wide over the battlefield. The commander looked up through the haze and saw it slicing over the ridge, an A-10, its engines screaming with raw power, its guns already trained toward the enemy below. The squad stared wide-eyed, caught between disbelief and relief. It was not just an aircraft, it was salvation forged in steel and fire. The machine dove low, its presence alone enough to scatter the first wave of attackers. But none of the SEALs yet understood who sat in the cockpit, who had found them in the desert, and why the A-10 swept down like a predator, unleashed its engines, screaming across the canyon, the sound ripping through the smoke. The squad held their breath as the roar grew deafening, and then it began, the rattle of its Gatling gun tearing the night apart. Each round like thunder pounding the earth. The enemy, who seconds before had pressed forward with certainty, now scattered, their formation shredded in an instant. The air shook with fury, and the SEALs pressed lower against the dirt, their bodies trembling from the force shells carved through vehicles, igniting them into pillars of fire. The ground erupted into craters, the very battlefield reshaped by the storm of lead and flame. The enemy scrambled, screaming into the night, some trying to flee, others desperate to return fire, but their weapons were powerless against the steel beast in the sky. The squad lifted their eyes, catching flashes of the pilot within the cockpit. Yet the smoke and light hid her face as if fate itself intended her identity to remain hidden for now. The commander barked for his squad to hold fire to conserve every last round because this was their window, their only chance to breathe as the A-10 circled back its silhouette slicing across the moon. Its guns, spitting fire once again sweeping the ridge where enemy mortars had been stationed, silence followed the devastation. No shells, no shouts. Only the whimper of the few who still dared to fight. The commander felt his chest pound with a new rhythm. Not despair, but disbelief. One operator muttered through cracked lips, "I thought no air support was coming." His voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. Another whispered back that maybe headquarters had heard their broken calls. Maybe this was the last lifeline pulled from nowhere. But the commander knew the truth. He had heard the silence. He had felt the absence of command. They had been abandoned, left to die. And yet here above them flew their salvation. And it was not by accident. A-10 dipped low again, the pilot's maneuver tight precise, threading the canyon with impossible control rounds, tore into another wave of hostiles, forcing them into retreat. The SEALs scrambled to reposition, dragging their wounded to what little cover remained as the commander shouted orders. But his eyes never left the sky, his mind racing with the question who was flying, who had found them, and why now. When all hope had died, that question gnawed at him harder than the battle itself. The youngest operator pressed his back against the stone wall, clutching his rifle, his voice rising in awe. "Whoever it is, they just saved us." The veteran beside him grunted, "Not saved yet. The fight is not over." The truth weighed heavy. They were still pinned. They were still bleeding, and though the enemy had been broken, they were not destroyed. Not yet. The battlefield was littered with shadows, still moving, regrouping, and the A-10, though powerful, could not stay forever. Fuel and time were always enemies. The commander keyed the radio again, this time aiming directly at the aircraft's frequency, his voice cracking with both desperation and respect, calling for the pilot to identify herself. Static rushed back, only static. He tried again, his throat raw, his words lost in the storm of battle, and then a single voice finally cut through, calm, sharp, precise. "This is Reaper. Actual, hold your ground and follow the smoke. When it clears." The SEALs froze, every man listening, every heart pounding at the sound. The voice was female, steady as steel, unshaken by the chaos below. And for a moment silence gripped the squad, more shocking than the gunfire had been. They exchanged looks, confusion etched into every dirt-streaked face. They had never heard of Reaper Actual. The call sign unfamiliar, the certainty in her tone undeniable. The commander gripped his radio tighter, demanding again for confirmation. But no answer came, only the thunder of engines as the A-10 rolled back into its assault, leaving them with the weight of her promise.